Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. As a Michigan fan myself, there's just not going to be many more things in my life that I'm going to be more dialed into over the next couple of weeks than what we're hearing out of this Michigan program in spring practice, specifically pertaining to quarterback Bryce Underwood. Now, we are only one spring practice in for this Michigan program, but you're already starting to hear some things that I think really encourage you if you're a Michigan fan about, what Bryce Underwood can do heading into 2025. And I think where I want to start this conversation, I want to talk about a couple of different things. As spring practice has started, we're getting some heights and weights for some of the new faces that we have in this Michigan program. I want to talk about some, early expectations about some of the newcomers into this program. But I want to start with the expectations that we have for Bryce Underwood heading into 2025. We've talked a lot about Bryce Underwood, but I don't think we've talked about, hey, what are the expectations for this kid in the 2025 year? You listen to a lot of the national media, and they'll get up there and say, hey, temper your expectations for a true freshman quarterback that is going into year one at the Power Four level, specifically in the Big Ten, when you're seeing a lot of really good defenses week in, week out. I understand where those people are coming from. I do think when you're talking about Bryce Underwood, it's a little bit different. And it kind of goes back 12 months ago when I broke down the commitment of Bryce Underwood, who committed to LSU. And I said, hey, this to me is the most talented quarterback that I've seen come out of high school since Trevor Lawrence. I still feel that way going into spring practice in 2025 as Bryce joins this Michigan program. And so what I'm meaning to say here is that I think it's okay for us Michigan fans to have pretty high expectations about Bryce Underwood because he's a little bit different than a lot of other quarterbacks that we see jump from the high school to the collegiate ranks. I think Bryce Underwood's expectations for himself are probably higher than any of our expectations. I think the expectations from this coaching staff around Bryce Underwood pretty darn high too. This is, in my opinion, a little bit of a different kind of cat that we're dealing with Bryce Underwood. And so for Michigan fans, I think it's okay to have high expectations about Bryce Underwood because I think that's what he's capable of doing as he joins this Michigan football team. Now, I want to get into some early feedback we are getting about Bryce. Chip Lindsey obviously talked a lot about him in his press conference yesterday afternoon. Now, before we get into it, as always, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys. I guess what I'd say is, buckle in because it's going to be a really fun next couple of weeks and months talking about some of the intel that we get coming out of spring practice. A lot to talk about over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Whether we are previewing this team for spring practice, whether we're talking about this team on the recruiting trail, as a Michigan fan, this is about as much fun as I've had talking about this program in a really dang long time. And the amount of support y'all have shown, it means the world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, what are your expectations for Bryce Underwood in 2025? Let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, let's start with, a common theme that we've seen regarding Bryce Underwood. And this is not only from Coach Sherrone Moore, who said this a lot when he's talking about Bryce, but Chip Lindsey also said it a couple of days ago in his press conference, and that is Bryce Underwood is all business. Now, why do I think that is notable about Bryce in the first couple of months is, hey, we all know that Bryce coming into this program, there was significant NIL involved in Bryce coming to Michigan. And that oftentimes in a lot of different college football programs, when these 18-year-old kids coming into college are getting as much NIL resources, you might say, as a guy like Bryce, you see it not always be just about business and about football and about getting better. Whenever you hear coaches talk about Bryce Underwood, it's always about he is just putting his head down, trying to get better at football. And then when Bryce Underwood is talking, obviously Bryce has done plenty of pressers too. I mean, that is what he says as well. All the feedback that you're getting around Bryce Underwood is this kid is all business since he's gotten to Ann Arbor. That's what you want to hear, especially when you're talking about a recruit, a new face that has as much media surrounding Bryce Underwood. And then number two, and this is what Chip Lindsey noted, he's extremely physically developed. Chip Lindsey said he's 220 plus, 6'4", 220 plus. Now he's listed only at 208, but you look at him and say, I wouldn't be surprised if he's pushing 220 pounds. He's a guy that you can do just about anything with. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in terms of what the impact can be around Bryce Underwood in this Michigan offense is there are things that you can ask Bryce to do that you couldn't ask Davis Warren to do. And I think it starts with what he can do as an athlete, incorporating him in the run game. 6'4", and if that's true that he's 220 plus pounds, you can get him involved in the run game, and he is phenomenal as a ball carrier. But you also can move the pocket. Get him outside the pocket, let him see the field with a little bit more space. Those are all things that you can do with the true freshman quarterback to get him a little bit more comfortable in the offense. And I think the beneficial part about Bryce is there's not a thing you can't ask him to do because he's so physically gifted. And then you talk about him as a pocket passer. You couldn't really ask Davis Warren to throw from the opposite hash to the boundary. You couldn't really ask Davis Warren to push the ball vertically down the field all that often because the arm wasn't all that live. There's not a throw that you can't ask Bryce to make. And so you can really open up this offense. You can do a lot of different things to attack a defense when you have a quarterback like Bryce Underwood. And so you're hearing all the right things. I think Bryce, from a physical trait standpoint, is going to open up this offense in ways that we just did not see in the 2024 year. It sounds to be exciting for us Michigan fans. And again, it's early, but it sounds like you're kind of hearing all the right things coming out of this Michigan program as it pertains to Bryce Underwood. Now, another kind of an intriguing storyline that we get going into spring is, some updates on height and weight of some of the newcomers. Now, Michigan did not update any of the heights and weights for the players that were previously on this roster. And so we don't know if Blake Frazier gained any weight. We don't know what Andrew Sprague is looking like going into spring. But we do have some intel on some of the new faces. There's two guys that stood out. One, Shamari Earls on the defensive side of the football, listed at 6'2", 205. This kid is going to be ready to play. And if you ask me for one freshman name that I think is going to play a significant role within this Michigan football team, is Shamari Earls. And at 6'2", 205, it's important to remind us all he was a 10-8 guy in the 100-meter dash. So, yes, he's really big and physically imposing as a boundary cornerback. He's also just about as fast as any wide receiver that you're going to see in the Big Ten. He can run with any wide receiver down the field. And I'm not saying, hey, Shamari Earls is going to be locking up Jeremiah Smith, but when you look at beating teams like Ohio State or beating teams like Texas in the college football playoffs, you need big, physical, fast cornerbacks that can deal with some of these elite wide receivers. And I don't know if it's going to be the freshman year. I don't know if it's going to be year 2 or year 3. You feel really good about just what Shamari Earls is about physically heading into the 2025 year as a true freshman. There's one guy that you might have to temper expectations for, at least I will, and that's Brady Norton. I loved Brady Norton's film from the FCS level last year, and he's coming into this Michigan program. He's listed at 6'3", 275 pounds. It's smaller than I thought, and it's significantly lighter than I thought. I thought Brady Norton maybe had an opportunity to push for a starting tackle position, maybe play on the inside of the offensive line. And I'm not getting up here and saying he can't do that, but I am saying that maybe my preseason expectations about Brady Norton playing and starting for Michigan in 2025, that's probably wait and see mode until we get into fall camp. The last one's Andrew Babaloa, 6'6", 300 pounds. That's kind of what you want to see. He's probably going to get up to around 310, 315 going into the fall camp. He's a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if you see cracked at 2 deep. I don't know if I'm saying he's going to be starting in 2025, but I mean, Michigan wants to build depth in the offensive tackle position. Would not be surprised if we see Andrew Babaloa emerge as a quality depth piece for Michigan as a freshman. And we know at some point this kid is going to be a really good football player for Michigan down the road. Last one I want to talk about is Wink Martindale on the defense. There's a couple of things that he noted, and there's a couple of things that we talked about throughout the spring or I should say winter probably, that Wink Martindale kind of doubled down on. It's a deeper football team than we had in the 2024 year. Now, you don't have a Mason Graham. You don't have a Kenneth Grant. You don't have a Will Johnson. I mean, those are Josiah Stewart. Throw him in there, too. I think Josiah Stewart should be talked about with some of those better players on that Michigan defense. You lose some elite top end NFL talent. But what Wink Martindale was very vocal about is this is a deeper team than we had last year, specifically in the secondary and specifically on the defensive line. I mean, you go back to the secondary for Michigan last year when Will Johnson was dealing with some injuries. I mean, you had to play Zeke Berry at the boundary cornerback spot, a position that he had never played before. And you just kind of throw him out there at the boundary cornerback spot because Michigan didn't really have that depth in the cornerback room. Now you feel good about Jair Hill. You feel good about Zeke Berry. You're feeling good about Josiah Edmond in terms of what we're hearing about him going into year 2. You bring in the transfer and Caleb Anderson. All of a sudden, you feel better about the depth in the secondary room. Obviously, getting Rod Moore back's a huge help. And then on the defensive line, I mean, last year it was Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Rayshon Benny. And then towards the end of the year, Trey Pierce and Eno Wetta kind of stepped up a little bit. Now on the defensive line, it's like, hey, we know Trey Pierce and Eno Wetta can play more consistently than they did to begin the 2024 year. You bring back Rayshon Benny. You go add Damon Payne and Trey Williams, two proven bona fide commodities on the middle of that defensive line. You're looking at the defensive line and say, we're a deeper unit than we were in 2024, which I think is massive. One of the most underrated parts about Michigan's defensive line in the 2023 year when they won a national championship was that was an extremely deep room. You talk about Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, but then you talk about Rayshon Benny, then you talk about Chris Jenkins. Those are 4 NFL guys that Michigan had in their 2 deep. Now, Michigan didn't really have that in the 2024 year. And so it's a deeper football team. It's a little bit more complete football team. And then the last thing Wink Martindale said, and this is probably what excites me the most about this Michigan defense, is year 2 is about elevating. Yes, Michigan has played a very similar defense from Mike McDonald to Jesse Minter to Wink Martindale, all kind of part of the same tree. I wouldn't be surprised if the language is pretty dang similar. But each defensive coordinator runs the defense a little bit different. Wink Martindale, a little bit more of an aggressive defensive coordinator. Year 1 was like drinking out of a fire hose and trying to get everybody comfortable with their roles in this defense. Year 2 is about elevating. Hey, we got a lot of versatile players. We got a guy like Jayshon Barham who we think we can be more aggressive with as a pass rusher. And then now we can kind of play around with, hey, everybody knows their role in this defense. Now it's getting more comfortable, putting players in better spots, and it's about elevating it going into the 2025 year. And Wink Martindale believes, or it sounds like he believes, that that's going to play a really big role with going into the 2025 year, along with Wink Martindale noting that he himself went through some growing pains as a play caller in college after spending the last 2 decades in the NFL, which I think is really worth noting as well. College and NFL offenses, they're just a little bit different. You probably play and call a defense a little bit different, whether it's the NFL or college. A lot to talk about. Most notably, we'll have a lot of conversations about Bryce, but there's a lot of storylines on this football team that I think are going to be really exciting for us Michigan fans to follow over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.